A UNC Asheville assistant professor has found a new image of President Abraham Lincoln in a picture.
And you startled, and that's the feeling that sort of went through me when I first glanced over and saw what I thought was Lincoln. And
we've identified through our investigation a site that we believe has U.S. property which is valuable and belongs to the U.S., particularly gold, maybe silver.
We started this as a historical recovery project, and we found that before it was over, history and science had to come together to tell time and to preserve the future.
4 years of brutal battles, over 600,000 lives lost. This is the Civil War era when the goriest stories were written. These tales are shrouded in mysteries and have remained unsolved for too many years, haunting every human who dared to open the history books. From the mysteries surrounding the last moments of Abraham Lincoln to the ghosts that reside permanently in Fort Monroe, these are the Civil War mysteries that were never solved. Hunley's fateful mission. To understand the genesis of why Hunley's last mission has long mystified maritime and military historians, you need to know why the submarine is important in the first place. You see, Hunley was the first ever submarine in history to sink an enemy's shop successfully. It was made out of 40 feet of bulletproof iron to be indomitable, and for the success of just a crew of 8. However, the unsinkable sinking submarine did sink for good after plunging a live torpedo into the hull of the Union warship USS Housatonic. And the craziest part? Not just once, but thrice, and all 3 happened within a career of just 8 months. The Hunley was recorded to have sunk between July 1863 and February 1864, killing about 30 men, including its inventor. The first 2 times Hunley sank, it was recovered and repaired with the hopes of protecting its reputation. But the 3rd time it sank, it rather left us many unanswered questions. Maybe it would have been recovered the 3rd time, but the submarine was never found until 1995, 130 years after it sank. 5 years later, it was brought to the surface, and inside it was an eerie sight of all 8 crew members maintaining their positions. What made these people stay where they were, even in the face of death? This also brings the question of why the sub sinks in the first place. Since discovery, researchers have tried to solve the puzzle, but they only found another piece to it. They discovered a hidden fail-safe mechanism in the Hunley's keel that should have helped the crew escape the vessel, but it was never activated. This suggests the crew may not have seen whatever sunk the sub coming. Also, after removing layers of corrosion, silt, and shells from the sub, researchers found that the emergency levers were all locked in position. The levers would have released 1,000 pounds of so-called keel blocks, bringing the submarine up to the surface and allowing the crew to swim away to safety. However, the safety button was not pushed, suggesting that there was little or no panic on board. This made the experts assume that the crew must have been killed instantly, perhaps by the blast from the submarine's spar torpedo. As simple as that sounds, there's still a possibility that it must have been what happened to them. Just so we can be convinced, a team of researchers conducted research in 2017 to prove their point. They made a scale model of the submarine, then blew it up in a pond. By measuring the forces, they were able to present the data to back up a long-held suspicion. However, despite these advancements, some experts have argued that the claims are true, leaving us to wonder what really happened to the Hunley on its final mission. The lost Lincoln photograph. This haunting image depicting a gaunt-faced man staring ahead lifelessly has left experts on the throats of one another. Some experts have claimed that this man is Abraham Lincoln, captured hours after he succumbed to an assassin's bullet on April 15, 1865. Well, to back up their claims, they have pointed attention to the spooky bulging right eye of the man in the image. But even with that, other experts have dismissed the mere possibility. However, experts didn't give up on the authentication of the picture. Not long ago, an Illinois dentist known as Gerald Spoler, who claimed ownership of the picture, called an expert in to check if the image was real or a hoax. The expert spent 2 years on the picture and said she is 99% convinced that the photo is genuine. You see, one of the reasons many experts won't agree without working in the image is because, at first glance, the face looks different, thinner, smoother, than the image of Lincoln that most Americans are familiar with. But as the story goes, the image was captured by Henry Ulk, a professional photographer who lived across the street from Washington's Ford's Theater in the boarding house where Lincoln was brought after being shot. Lincoln died early the next morning, and Olka supposedly took the picture in secret before the president's body was taken to the White House. It was an ambrotype, a process where a photo is created by using a glass negative on a dark background. That alone has led some experts to doubt the picture's authenticity, since ambrotypes were largely out of style by the mid-1860s. But why did Olka even keep this picture a secret for so many years if there's nothing fishy? Actually, it was because of Lincoln's powerful Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, who was strongly opposed to any images of the dead president, and the only available image of the moment was this one taken by Olka. One of the major problems of this picture started from the journey of this picture, which has moved from one hand to another since taken. According to the story, the photo was quietly given to the descendants of Nancy Hanks, Lincoln's mother in Illinois, and the 1980s was in the possession of Margaret Hanks, a second cousin of Lincoln. But before she died in 1986, she sold a collection of artifacts to Larry Davis, an auctioneer and Civil War buff from Quincy, Illinois. They included the ambrotype, affixed with a post-it note saying Cousin Abe. Davis, however, alleged that his ex-wife stole the ambrotype and sold it to Spoler, but the dentist disputes that he bought a stolen property. The story of the picture's journey isn't a straight one, coupled with the fact that some experts have questioned why there won't be an exit wound from the bullet fired into Lincoln's head, instead leaving him with a bulging eye. The ballistic expert consulted by Spoler, however, mentioned that it is unlikely for the bullet to have an exit wound, while a facial expert mentioned that the man in the image had a slight scar under the lip, consistent with one Lincoln had. According to Olka's descendants, Olka specialized in death photos, particularly ones with the eyes left open. So did this convince experts that it is a real photo? No. Holzer, who had spent his years looking for Lincoln's pictures and making a work out of it, has also said the picture can't be real. According to him, one of the last photographs of Lincoln taken alive that he found during his research shows Lincoln's once full beard was wispy, almost a goatee, but the man in the image has a full beard. However, some experts have also said there's evidence that the photo was retouched to add more facial hair and to color the cheeks, making them appear smoother. Holzer countered that Lincoln was stripped of his clothes to check for other wounds when he was brought to the boarding house, yet the man in the picture was wearing a shirt. He's also suspicious that it's an ambrotype used at a time most photographers had moved on to another process, and taken with apparently good lighting. He said, "Not every man with a beard photographed after 1861 was Abraham Lincoln." In case you still don't get why the authenticity of this photo is important to the experts, you should know that the only known photograph of Billy the Kid was bought for $2.3 million back in 2011. Now, what do you say about Abraham Lincoln's last photograph? Chilling tales of Fort Monroe. Right on the shores of Virginia's picturesque Hampton Roads lies a place shrouded in mystery. Fort Monroe. This place is a venerable military installation known to carry tales of valor, intrigue, and the restless spirits of the past. If you ever visited Fort Monroe without getting the chills down your spine, you must have visited during the day. Those who visited when the sun set over the Chesapeake Bay have recounted the secret whispers of times long gone, sparking a debate between skeptics and believers about whether this historical site is truly haunted. You see, Fort Monroe was built between 1819 and 1834 as a defensive stronghold to protect the entrance to the harbor and, by extension, the city of Hampton from potential invaders. With its formidable stone walls and strategic positioning, the fort played pivotal roles during the Civil War and beyond. It was, famously, the place where General Robert E. Lee's fate was decided after he surrendered in 1865, signaling the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. Now you know why the weight of history hangs heavily on the walls of Fort Monroe, giving rise to the idea that perhaps some remnants of the past have lingered. However, the tales of strange occurrences and sightings have overshadowed the tales of the battles fought in the fort. One of the most famous tales revolves around the spirit of a young girl named Alice. According to local legend, Alice was the daughter of a soldier stationed at Fort Monroe during the 19th century, who tragically fell to death from one of the fort's parapets while chasing her bouncing ball. To this day, visitors claim to hear the faint sound of a child's laughter and the echoing bounce of a ball when exploring the area, even when no visible presence can be found. Similarly, There have been spine-chilling stories of shadowy figures drifting through the corridors, whispers that seem to echo from nowhere, and inexplicable cold spots that defy logical explanations. You must have heard about this one, the wife of an officer who was killed by her husband for having an affair. According to Jane Polanski's book, The Ghosts of Fort Monroe, the woman was married to a captain who was stodgy and boring, in contrast to her very frivolous and light-headed character. So when the husband was away one weekend, the wife found a handsome young soldier and took him back home, only for her husband to surprisingly come back home, catch them in bed together, and shoot the wife. Since then, the wife roams the fort in her white nightdress and walks around the boardwalk to look for the young man she brought home. Another common tale of Fort Monroe is the tale of the moat monster. As the tale goes, an Army officer was on his way home when he saw something peculiar in the water while crossing the footbridge. According to him, something was swimming down the moat towards the footbridge larger than a fish. The unknown creature was reportedly crisscrossing quickly across the moat, and just before it reached the footbridge, it disappeared under the water. This particular story has gotten skeptics talking, as he's the only one to have seen this moat monster. However, supporters of the haunted Fort Monroe theory often point to the residual energy left behind by the fort's past as a plausible explanation for these eerie occurrences. The anguish of war, the emotions of soldiers separated from loved ones, and the imprints of the countless lives that crossed paths within the fort's walls might have left a lasting mark on the environment, manifesting as ghostly apparitions or paranormal events. One question though, have you ever visited Fort Monroe? Share your experience with us. While you're at it, let's talk about our subscribers pick. This picture was captured in 2018 when the FBI was excavating a site in search of the lost Confederate gold. However, 2 days after the digging, they reported that nothing was on the site. This report has, however, raised eyebrows as many speculated that the FBI dug the area in the middle of the night and spirited the gold away secretly. Different witnesses came forward to mention that they indeed saw them in the act, while some said they took pictures of the act, which mysteriously disappeared from their phones. How did the Confederate gold end up getting lost? And why was the FBI digging this particular site? Let's analyze. The lost and found Confederate gold. It all started when the South eventually lost the war in April 1865. The country was torn by the conflict, and they desperately needed all the money they could get their hands on to rebuild. This is why the North was more than eager to get their hands on the Confederate war treasury, but they were in for a surprise. The gold was nowhere to be found. Since then, there have been theories about gold. Some say it was divided up and buried by many plantation owners to wait for the day when the South would rise again. Others say it was robbed by a ragtag team of Confederate and Union deserters, never to be seen again, while some just gave up racking their brains and maintained that it just disappeared. While everyone lived with their chosen beliefs in their heads, a man named Dennis Parada would shake up the sleeping world of mysteries around the lost Confederate gold. In 1974, when a 22-year-old Parada was working at a furniture store in Phillipsburg, a psychic named Michael Malley, brought in by the company as a promotional stunt, was shown this magazine article about a lost cache of Civil War gold buried in Pennsylvania. The psychic grabbed a map, intuited the location, and made plans to start a search. Parada checked the location out, but ultimately relented and gave up the search for decades until a tenant of his in 2004 suggested a return. He agreed, surprising his son Kem, who had been told the tales of the fabled bounty as a child. Together, the three headed into the woods and located a cave Parada had never seen before. There, they found encouraging clues underground, potential artifacts and signs of long-gone life, as well as traces of pig iron, a popular material for Civil War armaments, leaching through the rocks. They pushed in farther until Parada was warned about the structural integrity of the cave and urged to continue his search from the surface. He pulled back but didn't give up. He put a drill bit straight into the earth and pulled it out to find what he said was soft gold wedged into the tip. Per Parada's account, he showed the find to a representative of the state's Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, but they doubted its authenticity. After that, he was told to stop digging, but he kept going back. Fast forward to 2017, when a web post about the search written by Parada grabbed the attention of a former Wall Street Journal reporter named Warren Gettler, who set up a meeting with the FBI. The FBI agreed to visit the site and applied for a warrant instead of simply asking the landowner, the state of Pennsylvania, for permission to dig. Why did they do that? The Bureau said it feared that Pennsylvania would claim the gold for itself. It also cited the corrupt actions of an unnamed legislative staffer who, the warrant application claimed, had offered Parada a digging permit in 2013 in exchange for a cut of the proceeds. And finally, the FBI also said a hidden trail camera at the site had captured an excavating machine working there in 2015, which the Bureau believed to be operated by DCNR. With the FBI on board and the warrant secured, they headed to the site. Meanwhile, geoscans conducted months before had superficially confirmed underground pockets of metal with a density matching that of gold, with one FBI agent estimating over 9 tons total. If true and found, it would potentially be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Everything looked promising until the Bureau dug up the site and presented an empty hole after 2 days. Parada was irate and immediately came up with a theory. He believes that the FBI, after capping day 1 of the search, returned in the overnight hours, exhumed the gold in secret, and carried it off in a fleet of armored trucks. Then, on day 2, they declared the dig a bust. He wasn't the only one who believed that the FBI wasn't truthful. One woman in the area named Cheryl Elder remembers a big commotion and lots of light at the mountainside site on that intervening night, and her husband, who was away on business, told the news she called him about it and said it was lit up like the 4th of July. Some locals have also reported seeing a caravan of armored trucks leaving the area. They claimed they took pictures, but the digital files all quickly vanished from their phones. Kem also questioned why the initial geoscan hit gold before digging, and the one after digging did not. In the end, the Paradas sued the FBI, but the FBI, however, maintained that nothing was found at the site, and that this was all merely conjecture and magical thinking. This shifted the focus from the location of the lost Confederation gold to the case between the Paradas and the FBI. Now the question is, did the FBI really cart away the gold, or was there no gold to start with? What do you think about this case? Next is the death of Stonewall Jackson. While it is normal for humans to die, Stonewall's death is a mysterious one. Lieutenant General Thomas J. Jackson, known as Stonewall, was a major figure in the Civil War, second in command to Confederate General Robert E. Lee. On May 2, 1863, he was shot by friendly fire during the Battle of Chancellorsville. Shortly after that battle in northeastern Virginia, Jackson died of his wounds, leaving the Confederate Army without one of its boldest military strategists just 2 months before the pivotal Battle of Gettysburg. Questions started to circulate about how Stonewall's troops could have mistaken him for the enemy, a mystery that has been unexplained until now. The first-hand accounts of the Chancellorsville battle describe how Stonewall kept his troops fighting into the night, something that was rare at the time. That same day, he had accomplished a major victory, squashing the Union's 12th Corps in a famous flank attack. But he didn't stop there. When the sun set that night and the sky darkened, Stonewall pressed on, continuing the fighting by moonlight. It was then that a Confederate officer on the left wing of the 18th North Carolina Regiment spotted Jackson and a group of riders coming toward him. Mistaking his commander for advancing enemies, Major John Barry ordered his troops to fire. Jackson was hit with bullets in his right wrist and left arm, which had to be amputated, and died of complications from pneumonia 8 days later. On the surface, it looks like his death was a blow of bad luck, but on the other hand, many people have questioned the truth in the account. Barry, throughout his entire life, felt extreme guilt for giving the command. However, some astronomers believed that the account was true, and that something must have happened that we didn't know. On the battle's 150th anniversary, the astronomer Don Olson and a researcher, Lori E. Jasinski, started the research. They calculated the moon's position and the lunar phase using astronomical software, and figured out exactly where Jackson's party, as well as the 18th North Carolina Regiment, would have been at the time of the shooting, around 9 p.m. that night. They used Confederate almanacs in Richmond at the Virginia Historical Society, as well as battle maps by Robert Crick, a military historian who is an expert on the Battle of Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson, and the Civil War in Virginia. Once the calculation was done, they compared it to the detailed battle maps published by Robert Crick, and came to the conclusion, how Stonewall Jackson would have been seen as a dark silhouette from the point of view of the 18th North Carolina Regiment. While that is reasonable enough, it is still not generally accepted to be the truth. The Soldiers of Kolb's Farm. On June 22, 1864, there was a battle on this farm known as Kolb's Farm. After the battle, 1,350 lives were lost, bringing end and quiet to the area. Or maybe not. It soon appeared that Kolb's Farm hadn't always been as quiet as anyone thought. Decades after the Civil War, a couple, Catherine and James Tatum, fell in love with the area and decided to build a 2-story contemporary house on it. Soon, they started experiencing strange occurrences in the home, sending chills down their spines. Catherine had a bell referred to as a little angel bell, which she kept for getting James's attention whenever she woke. James was an early riser. He would go downstairs to the living room, drink coffee, and read the newspaper as his wife still slept. So anytime Catherine awoke, she would ring the bell. One morning, James heard the bell ring, so he headed upstairs, but Catherine was still in bed asleep. Later, the couple joked that it must be the ghost, unknown to them that they could be right. A few days later, the bell rang again, but Catherine was asleep. The couple decided to instate a code where James would only respond to the signal if he heard 3 rings. Maybe the ghost did pay attention to their bargain, as James was summoned upstairs, yet again, to find Catherine asleep. And as he left the room, he heard the 3 rings once more. James then emotionally told Catherine that he wasn't going to answer that bell ever again. After this, the bell remained silent. For months, Catherine was the ghost's primary target. A year after they moved into their home in Marietta, she was up at 2 a.m. using the restroom when she saw a man pass by the door. She assumed it was James and called out, but he didn't respond. She followed this figure in the dark as it headed toward the staircase. She called out again, but still, there was no response. She returned to the master bedroom to find James in bed and told him what she had seen. James grabbed his gun and searched the house, thinking there was an intruder, but everything was locked, and he saw no one. According to Catherine, the figure wore a long coat and floppy hat that was drawn down over his face, which sounds like what soldiers wore in the 19th century. While James didn't know what to make of her experience, the ghost continued to tease and scare Catherine. One afternoon, James, who was doing an odd job upstairs, left his drill propped against a wall and went down to watch the TV. Catherine heard this drill being turned on and off repeatedly and wondered what James was doing. But she later discovered James was downstairs. Again, one afternoon, as she watched the TV in the bedroom, she heard a popping sound in the middle of the room. She turned the set off so she could hear. She got up and discovered a field of static electricity in the middle of the room. She then moved back into a corner, at which point this field followed her and popped right near her face. In another chilling account, Catherine also saw coins dropping into a wooden bowl that James used for keeping his loose change. She at first thought it was her husband, but when she looked up, it was an unseen hand dropping the coins. Another time, the ghost moved a tray that held a glass of water and Tums that was kept by the bed. Catherine heard the wafers drop one by one down onto the plate, and then the whole thing hit the floor. All of these happened, and the couple didn't have a clue what was going on until the bell incident. Catherine checked into the history of the land their new house sat upon, and she discovered that a Civil War battle was fought near their subdivision. If they were the only ones, maybe we won't be talking about this, but other homeowners in the Tatum subdivision have also experienced hauntings. In October 2007, a male resident out for a drive one night with his teenage son spotted a horse and a Union cavalry officer in his car headlights. The father quickly braked, and the horse passed right in front of their car. The two watched in awe as the figure moved across the road and right through a fence where the horse and rider just faded away. That night, they were crossing the Kennesaw Mountain, where a much bloodier battle occurred right after the Kolb Farm skirmish. Whether these stories are true or not is not clear to anyone, as no non-resident of the area has experienced such. Would you love to check Kolb's Farm out for us? Whenever you do, remember to drop your experience in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.